All right, first question from the listeners. How impactful will the Jalen Carter legal situation, how will it affect his draft stock?
Well, at UGA Dog 99, I assume that's the person who submitted the question. I mean, it's going to impact it. I mean, it's hard for it not to. You know, there was some chatter from Todd McShay recently, I believe, that there was character concerns about Jalen Carter. And Sully, you may know better than I, or one of you, Breech, you may know better than I, like the specifics of. It was one of those things where, like, because it's Jalen Carter, he's a stud on a big team, and like the immediate reaction was like, "How dare you, Todd McShay, slander Jalen Carter?" Yeah. And then it turns out there's actually concerns with Jalen Carter, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where you do have to trust the information getters when they bring this stuff to the table. And so talking about whether or not it's going to impact his draft stock, it is going to be interesting. And I'm with you, Will. It's going to impact it somehow. It just depends on how crazy of a fall that we could potentially see. One thing that I think is going to be interesting is he was at the combine. He's since returned, reportedly. But in those days leading up to this news coming out, how many teams did he meet with? Was he forthright in talking about this situation? Or are those teams that he talked to, he didn't say a word and they're just finding this out for the first time, and now all of a sudden you're having even more character concerns because he's trying to sweep that under the rug?
Yeah, and that's a little bit what our buddy and good friend of the podcast, Rick Spielman, former Vikings general manager, talked about on With the First Pick with Ryan Wilson. Was
never heard of it.
It's a new podcast on CBS Sports, Brinson, that you have never once plugged on this show. But no, Spielman basically said, hey, look, if you talk to Jalen Carter on Monday to Tuesday before this news broke and he was forthcoming and he shared that information with you, then you're fine with it as a team, and it's probably not going to hurt his stock too much. But if he didn't say anything, then that's a gigantic red flag, and that is where his stock takes a hit. So when it comes down to it, what happened at UGA was awful, but Jalen Carter here has been charged with 2 misdemeanors, and I think most NFL teams are probably willing to overlook 2 misdemeanors. So, maybe instead of a top 5 pick, he drops into the top 12, but I don't think it's going to kill his draft stock.
Worth noting, Chris Trapasso, friend of the pod, of course, had him going 17th overall to the Steelers in a post Jalen Carter, charge or, news mock draft. I think the interesting thing about this is Breech, you point out, maybe he goes from top 5 to top 12. Well, I think this has a massive impact, Katie, on what might happen with the number 1 pick, because you had this situation where everybody's like, oh, the Bears will just trade out of 1 and they'll just move down. It's like, 1, it's not that simple. It's not that cheap to move. Like it costs a lot to get the number 1 pick. And then 2, the Bears, a team like that, is only going to move down far enough where they can get someone, a stud player. And if you take Jalen Carter out of the top 5, it suddenly becomes a situation where, if they move to 4, are they guaranteed to get Will Anderson? Like, is there another guy, are they willing to take Jalen Carter at 4 if they do a swap with the Colts? It almost takes the Panthers out of contention to trade up to 1. People would love to do that, but it's like, they're at 9. If you move down to 9, you maybe get Jalen Carter there. But the point being is it shrinks the window with which the Bears can trade out of 1, in my opinion. It's just hard to pull off.
And there's one thing to point out here, too. I mean, yeah, the timing of it isn't great because it was day 1 of the NFL scouting combine. The whole NFL was under one roof. But it's not like it was draft night where all of a sudden you have guys completely, or teams saying, you know what, we're not drafting this guy, we're not touching him, and it's a Tunsil situation 2.0. There at least is now time for teams to look into the situation and come to some sort of conclusion whether or not they want to draft him or not, because more often than not, if these things come out draft night, round 1, he's having a much bigger free fall than I think he will have later on this spring.
You mean like if he was smoking a bong on camera?
Yeah, it wouldn't be
in
great.
A picture that was released on draft night? Something like
that.
It's
not just a bong. It's a gas mask bong. It wasn't just like a bong hit. It was like a bong hit out of a gas mask.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like this is bad, but guys have been drafted and done well with worse. I mean, look at someone like Tyreek Hill, or things that happened in college like domestic violence, and they still get drafted. So these 2 misdemeanors, I don't think is going to affect him that much.
Yeah, former Cardinals GM Steve Keim had a famous quote. He was like, if Hannibal Lecter ran a 4.40, we'd draft him in the first round. You know, like that's just. I mean, he said it at the combine. I think like, he ain't wrong either. Like if you're a really talented football player, people will look past off-field situations, particularly if it's something, you know, where the circumstances TBD. But yeah.
Yeah, Joe Mixon too. They were talking about. All right. How about let's talk Super Bowl? It's not that far away now. Super Bowl 57 field. Was it overwatered? What do you guys think? I mean, a lot of players said they were slipping all over the place. They were saying they watered it down, then they put a tarp on it, that it smelled like it was moldy. I mean, what do you guys think?
I mean, that's what the Sod Father said. I mean, you know, we have a story up. We have the story up by George Toma, the Sod Father. He was a longtime groundskeeper. He basically said that it was overwatered. It had that smell, and it's tough because in that environment in Arizona in the desert, it does make for a slippery surface. We've seen it back in earlier this season when it was a completely different field with the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Cardinals. It was an issue then. It was clearly an issue in the Super Bowl. So sure, if the Sod Father's telling me that it was overwatered, who am I to say that it wasn't?
And let me throw in there that the Sod Father, George Toma, has been in charge of the sod or the grass for every single Super Bowl since Super Bowl I. The man is 94 years old. He does not give a single F anymore, and he threw everyone under the bus during this interview with ESPN. I think his biggest problem was the fact that he was the name being associated with the slippery field and why the conditions were bad, when in fact a guy named Ed Mangan is the one who was in charge of the field. He is the NFL's field director, so he had final say on how the field was treated. And Toma essentially said that Mangan had no idea what he was doing, that he overwatered the field, so the Cardinals have a retractable field that rolls out of the stadium to get watered and sun and then rolls back into the stadium, and that the guy watered it a ton the Wednesday before the Super Bowl and immediately rolled it back in the stadium when he should have left it out there for a few hours to dry. And so, you know, none of us are sod experts, but that seems like
that's the basic ass sod maintenance. I mean, like,
right, exactly. Like, you think everyone knows that one. And then Tom also said that they weren't sanding it right, and this was just a total disaster. And, you know, the NFL hasn't responded to this either. So, yes, if I'm the Eagles, I guess the Chiefs won, so they don't care. But if I'm the Eagles, I am irate at this information coming out now.
What's crazy is that, like, you go back to the same stuff with, like, the chains, you know, and the like spotting the ball. It's like, this is an $18 billion business. You can't figure out sod. You can't hire like more than one guy to handle like the sod decisions for the freaking Super Bowl. You roll out this new sod and like this guy it drives me nuts, Sully.
Yeah, but I'll say this though. It's not like this completely came out of nowhere. Like we've been mentioning with this story the entire time. It's like this in Arizona. I know it was a different field. I know that they try to do their own different thing. But if you're these head coaches, you do have to put that at least in the back of your mind a little bit. I thought Danny Amendola had an interview, I think it was on Chris Long's podcast, talking about this in Super Bowl 49 against the Seahawks with the Patriots. And Belichick mandated that they all wear 7s, which is basically just a different kind of cleat that has more traction in that. So it is something that's on coaches' radar. So as much as we're saying, oh, the Philadelphia Eagles should be upset about this, well, you kind of knew what you were getting into. It's not like this was an unknown storyline.
Well, I mean, the Chiefs knew what they were getting into because they played in Arizona in week 1 and complained about the field. They said it was slippery. Harrison Butker injured his ankle because he slipped on a kickoff. Trent McDuffie got injured in that game too, and Andy Reid blamed both those on field conditions. And the Eagles actually played on this type of grass. They have that at their home stadium. So they probably thought, oh, it should be pretty similar. This is what we play on in Philadelphia. But obviously, as Tyler has noted, the climate in Phoenix and Philadelphia are slightly different.
And I would point out, and sorry, Katie, for this, but friend of the podcast, Emmitt Smith, came on the show. He talked about how Jimmy Johnson against the 49ers in the NFC Championship game way back in the day went out there and scouted both sides of the field. It was like, if we run a comeback route to Michael Irvin, we run it on this side. Like this side, it was weather related, but he was like, he went to North Turner and was like, if you run a pitch or like a cutback toss to Emmitt Smith, do it only on this side of the field. Don't do it over here. The field condition is just worse. So it's like, you know, I mean, to me, this field, you know, both teams have to play on the field, right? Like you just got to deal with whatever the field is. And again, just NFL, just fix your freaking turf, guys.
for the Super Bowl too, of all games. How much do you think it affected the actual game? I mean, obviously there were no sacks, which I lost a lot of money on because I had a first sack prop. I had over sacks, all kinds of sacks, and there was not one from the two teams that had the most sacks. Obviously, that has to do with the grass.
You should get a refund on all your bets.
I should get a refund on all my bets. And, I'm not a person that will email the sports book when somebody goes down to get a refund. And I know that we're not talking about this, but I would like to ask this to you guys, actually, as a member of this podcast and also a listener as well. What do you think of people who are requesting refunds from sports books when a player goes down an injury? Because I kind of think it's a little bit ridiculous. You're gambling. You don't know what's going to happen. You caught a tough break if somebody goes down.
Yeah, I mean, like I've been, look, I had a NC State for a lot of, some amount of money when Gio Bernard took the kickoff to the house, and we're like, well, we're gonna lose to Carolina, but at least we can't blow the 7.5-point spread, and then they fumbled the snap on the kick and then throw it into the end zone for 2 points. You're gambling. Like bad beats happen. You're I mean, deal with it. Now, if sportsbooks want to fire up a bunch of promos in order to get, generate publicity, I'm okay with that. But generally speaking, it's kind of weak sauce. If you're like, I want a refund, I got screwed.
Yeah, I don't fault some of the sports books if they want to do it because it is good PR. It will keep your customers happy. But if you're like a fan, no, again, like we're all saying, gambling you're not entitled to winning money. You are risking money and you're going to lose it under some weird circumstances sometimes.
Yeah, we're all on the same page here. How's that even possible? If you gamble on someone to have an over 4.5 catches in the Super Bowl, it's Juju Smith-Schuster, and he gets hurt on the first play. You guys said it. It's gambling. What happens, happens. Maybe he catches 5 passes on the first drive and hits the over. You don't get, there's crazy things can happen. And that's what gambling, that's the name of the game.
Imagine doing that at a casino. If you get a bad card or something, you're like, no, I don't actually like this card. It's not good enough. Let's get a refund here. Like, you're not going to do that there. But I do feel like with Twitter, people are bullying these sports books into giving them refunds. And it was interesting when Patrick Mahomes went down the first time with his ankle, they were offering all kinds of refunds. And then he came back and they ended up winning the game. So it's like, joke's on you guys. I agree.
It's it's easy to whine on, especially, if you got a Twitter blue and you want to tag that, where you got you want to complain. It's easy to do that. Yeah. You know, it's play at a casino. You're like, hey buddy, look, you got cooled. You're out of here. Here's a drink. Get lost.
And you could literally complain about anything. You could be somebody who bet on the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Well, there was a holding call I didn't agree with, so I should get my money back, even if the corner in question said he actually held the receiver. You can complain about anything in any game and demand your money back. That doesn't mean you should get it. Don't give anyone their money back.
Yep.
Don't give anyone that. It's gambling. You are gambling your money. You don't know if you're going to win or not, and accidents and injuries.
I'll take my money back, but I mean,
no. Don't set that precedent.
I don't. Yeah, that would be amazing. But actually, I don't want the money back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would never ask though.
Yeah, I would just passively aggressively state that I will take my money back. I'm not asking for it, but I will take it all back.
Well, the good news is it doesn't even ask. They just refund you. It just shows back up in your bankroll. So then it's like, all right, thanks, Twitter. Although I think that you are lame for doing that.